Mr. Beacon podcast is sponsored by Williot, scaling IoT with battery-free Bluetooth.
Welcome to the Mr. Beacon podcast. This week we are going to be talking about failure and some other related things. I'm really delighted to have Dr. Samuel West with me, Curator, amongst other things, of the Museum of Failure. Samuel, thanks very much for joining us.
Great. It's a pleasure being on your show.
Well,
I think so. I don't know yet. I'm just saying that. I might regret it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, this could be a failure. It could be a failure on many, many levels, but I have a feeling it won't be.
My first failure, so that's okay.
Well, we're going to talk about that, but there's a few things I wanted to cover in this because people may be wondering what the heck, because normally we're talking about wireless technologies, but I saw you present in Copenhagen. We were both part of the Deloitte Digital Agenda Summit, which looked like it was going to be a failure. The conference was booked with one of the biggest meeting spaces in Copenhagen. The chairs were set out, and then we were told we can't do this anymore. But I assume you flew in like me. I flew in from the States, and I was kind of wondering, why the heck am I doing this? But, it's Deloitte, and it was just, I wanted to honor the commitment. So I guess we both flew in, and it turned out there were 1,000 people online watching this thing. And so we thought it was going to be a failure. We embraced it. And it turned out to be a success. And I think actually over the months, there'll probably be more people watching it than would have done otherwise. But I just want to get to the agenda for this session, which is, you've specialized in failure and play as well in your career. So, why talk about failure? It's because of lessons learned. It's, I think, about a philosophy of embracing failure and how that can help you as a person and as a company, as a team. And also want to talk a bit about our pet area, which is not your area of specialism, but Bluetooth beacons. And you could argue that has failed. You can argue that it's succeeded, but it certainly had some of the hallmarks of some of the exhibits in the Museum of Failure, which it was really hyped. So that's what I'd like to cover. There's actually many, many other things I want to cover, but it's basically lessons learned, kind of how we can do better for ourselves, whatever that means. And then we'll talk a bit about beacons at the end and probably many other things. But first of all, what is the Museum of Failure?
The Museum of Failure is a collection of over 100. I actually think at my last count was 130 different innovations that have failed. And these innovations can be, tech products. They can be medical products. They can be digital services. Anything that would be considered an innovation is welcome in the museum as long as it's failed. Yes. So the innovation is sort of the easy part. I mean, so the Samsung, I think, what was the name of the Samsung that exploded on planes?
Oh yeah, the Note.
Was it the Note
or the Galaxy something?
The Galaxy Note.
Yes.
Galaxy Note. Yeah. So I have like 4 of them. People keep sending me these Galaxy Notes saying it's a donation to your museum. It'll never make it into the museum because it was not an innovation. It was just crap manufacturing and quality control.
Right.
So that's not going to be in the museum ever. But the Samsung Fold that recently came out, that one will make it. I can't afford it right now, but
maybe someone will donate this. Maybe someone will hear
it. Yeah, send it to me.
But you have some amazing
that one
stuff.
Definitely belongs in the museum.
But it's actually...
I just want to differentiate because the difference between just failure and innovation failure, for me, the important part for this collection is that it be something that's innovative.
Right. And so you're a writer. You're a public speaker. So you came to the Deloitte thing in Copenhagen, and listening to you, it's very amusing. I mean, we love laughing at failure, don't we? Especially if it's other people's.
Yeah. Yes. Well, there is a nice quote, and I don't know who to attribute this to, but it's probably German. It's wise people learn from their own failures, but it's even wiser to learn from the failures of others.
Yes.
And there's something like that going on at the museum, absolutely. But the enjoyment part, I mean, it doesn't matter how you approach failure, at least in this context where, it's not about people dying or getting hurt for the most part, that it is humorous. I mean, there's something about it that's funny,
It's not about people dying or getting hurt, but it is about people getting diarrhea, isn't it? That's kind of one of the failures.
Funny you mentioned that.
Yeah. So the Colgate lasagna, or what was that?
The Colgate Lasagna is one example of like a brand that didn't understand the brand itself. And Colgate, this is from the branding, the literature on branding and brand failures. In the 1980s, Colgate launched a product of frozen dinners, TV dinners. And I don't have the originals, but the branding says, like whatever the regular frozen dinners would be, for my museum, we recreated it as a Colgate Lasagna. And that's just one of those funny failures that I'm not sure there's like a whole bunch of learning to be gained. It's just, what were they thinking? You remember it? You're old enough to remember New Coke, yeah?
I remember New Coke, yes. Yeah, and it just didn't go down totally.
No, it didn't. It was one of Coca-Cola's biggest mistakes. That ironically boosted sales of Coca-Cola in the long run, but that's another story.
Well, how did that work? I'm sort of torn here because we could just spend the time laughing at companies and not learning, couldn't we? But the point is, we can learn, but. So do you think Coke learned from that experience, and how did they benefit from the failure?
Two questions. So Pepsi was the underdog, and Pepsi did something called, and I remember this in Sacramento where I grew up. They had take the Pepsi challenge. Mm-hmm. So they would be at markets and different events and places. You could go there and you get little plastic mugs of Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and you got to try both of them. And people preferred Pepsi. Like, that's what Pepsi said,
Yes.
And then apparently Coca-Cola did their own market research, and they found out that people actually preferred Pepsi. So Coca-Cola decides that they're like, they changed their sort of secret, iconic recipe and made Coke taste more like Pepsi. And people hated it. They're like, don't touch our brand. This is ours,
Yes.
We love Coke. We don't want Pepsi. Well, we'd buy Pepsi, There was a huge, backlash against Coca-Cola, and they had to retreat and say, okay, we're going to keep New Coke there. And they rebranded Coke as New Coke. And then they gave the old Coke the name Classic, which you can still see on the cans and bottles today.
Yeah.
So Coca-Cola Classic. And then they phased out New Coke later on. Now, it's a huge failure on Coca-Cola's part. But the interesting thing is that people were so afraid of not getting any more Coke, so they hamstered it. They went crazy buying Coke Classic, which boosted Coca-Cola's sale. And the CEO of Coca-Cola said later, after the fact, that it did boost our sales, but we're not that smart. Like, this is too is too good for us. Yeah.
So if we're on the topic of learning from failure, what are you? If you're a organizational psychologist, and so you kind of got into this for maybe whimsical reasons, but also serious reasons, it seems to me. And I do want to talk a bit about. I was actually skimming through your PhD thesis on play at work, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I want to get into that eventually if we have the time. But do you have? Can you summarize in some way? How organizations should deal with failure? Because it seems like if we stick our head in the sands and we say our strategy is to never fail as an organization, that is like just dumb, isn't it? It's just completely unrealistic. So you will fail. The question is how you treat failure. Basically, I guess it's about risk taking, and then how much risk do you want to take as an organization? And that's a dial you can play with. And I don't think you can say there's a right or a wrong answer to that, is there? It's like for startups, if we're not taking risks, then why be a startup? We should be IBM.
Yeah, you're wasting your time. There's several aspects. One is organizations, and this is one of the aims. One of the aims of the museum is to drive home the point that we need to accept failure if we want progress or innovation. So that's like number one.
Yes.
Number two, which comes from my background as an organizational psychologist, is that organizations need to improve their learning from failure. So, and this is something that gets tricky right away, because you often hear about Silicon Valley. Oh, they're like they fail forward and this fearlessness. Yes. And they are good. They're really good at accepting failure, but they're horrible at learning from failure. So they got the one part right, but they didn't get the second part right. Not any more than any other organization area. And that's quite interesting. So so if organizations want, on the one hand, if they want innovation and think that that's important, which just about any organization on planet Earth thinks, they need to accept failure. There's not really an option there. But learning from failure does require a willingness to discuss it, to talk about it, to spend some time and resources trying to glean some kind of learnings from it, because it's seldom straightforward. It's easy to learn from success and best practices, but it's really difficult and sort of tricky to learn from failure, because it's not.
I would actually argue that sometimes it can be hard to learn from success, can't it?
That's why I think the phrase is.
There's a really horrible line here, but you're in Spain, I'm in San Diego. We should be grateful there's any line. I would argue I've met a whole bunch of people that have worked for successful organizations, and they've learned the wrong lessons from it. They think the success is all due to them and what they did. And actually what they did is completely irrelevant to the success.
It's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, I always do push-ups at the start of my day, and I work for Google, and it's clearly, that's the thing that's making me successful. No, it's because you've got Google on your business card, and everyone's clamoring to talk to you, and therefore your opportunity space is massive, and you can be an idiot and actually probably do reasonably well. But anyway, let's get back to, is there a company, or are there companies that you've seen that are really good at failure? As in, A, accepting it, and B, maybe the harder thing, which is you've put your finger on, which is learning from it.
Yeah. Okay, this is a trite example, but Amazon. I can't think of a single big company that is just kicks ass, so to speak, when it comes to both accepting failure, understanding the role of failure for their success, and learning from it, and then adapting to it. They're just phenomenal. And there's something, Google or Alphabet is also, they're really good at accepting failure, but if you look at their huge list of failed innovations, you could argue that Google is great at, at initiating innovation, but they're pretty bad at actually maintaining any of that, or bringing them to market and being profitable on those on their most exciting innovations. So I'm not in a position to say that Google isn't learning from their failures, but considering how many failures they have, they should learn a bit more, you would think.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah.
Well, so if I look at Amazon and that embracing of failure, my intuitive sense, and I don't know, is Jeff Bezos just happens to be a genius, and therefore he looks at his organization. I'm not sure if he embraces failure. I'm just trying to imagine myself going to Jeff Bezos and saying I screwed up, or
I screwed up. I need another 30 million.
Yeah, but it seems like one way to learn from failure is have a genius in a leadership position, and you kind of either have those or you don't. Is there, if I was a general manager or a CEO, other than paying attention and thinking about it myself, is there and not firing people or humiliating them for failure? Is there anything else I can do other than steering the culture? Is there like a debrief process, or what would you advise?
Yeah, I mean, one of them. I mean, if you look at if you look at it as behavior, I mean, taking risks, meaningful risks, and being willing to discuss your own failure, or the failure of your team or the company. There's two aspects. One, obviously, if the organization is penalizing risk taking by penalizing failure, then obviously that behavior is going to decrease. Period. That's just basic psychology.
Yeah.
And then you have the second aspect, which the concept of psychological safety brilliantly sort of illustrates, is that if you have a culture within a team that allows people to take interpersonal risk, to ask stupid questions, to ask uncomfortable questions, and feel safe within that team, that they won't be punished for that. That does increase a willingness to take risks that are or can be meaningful, and it also increases the ability and willingness for those team members to actually learn from their failures. So there's something about creating a culture of this sense of safety within the team. It's not lack of accountability, so it definitely not that. You're highly accountable, but you are also, there's an acceptance that when you take big risks, or when you do things that are new for you or the organization or extremely challenging, then you will most likely fail, and that it's not built into the system or the infrastructure or the reinforcement structure of the organization that will be punished. I don't know. I don't know if I'm babbling here, but
no, it's good. I'm just really thinking about what you're doing, you're saying. Yeah.
I just think like the most important thing is the culture, but the culture is also decided by reward mechanisms within the organization. For example, the problem with James March, one of the biggest organizational psychologists, he's like, one of the problems is because of the way organizations are built. This is like bigger organizations, not startups necessarily. Is that it's sort of a refinement process, that the selection process towards people who don't take risks and don't fail. So at the top, you have people who, at least traditionally, are risk aversive and are prone to penalizing people who do take those risks.
Yeah. I think if you
that's
can,
one aspect. Yeah.
As a leader, if you can talk about your own failures in kind of with humility and honesty, and that's probably a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and that's one thing that we've found. I mean, when it comes to my research on organizational playfulness, is that, and we'll get to that later, but I mean, a big part of play is exploration and experimentation, and those are two super high failure rate of those two behaviors or activities. And if the only way you can get people in an organization to be willing to experiment and explore is if the leaders are demonstrating it by role modeling it by example.
Yeah.
There is no other way.
That's good. So one thing I wanted to ask you about this Silicon Valley maxim of about fail fast, and everyone's like, yeah, of course we should fail fast. Let's all do that. Can you fail too fast? Do you think? Because I personally think so. I think I think it's great that we're embracing the possibility of failure. We're taking risks, and we don't do the whole waterfall development. We put something out there and we see if it works. That's clearly good. It's hard to argue against that. But what I see is people try something and something goes wrong and maybe they lose a little face and then they give up. And to me, that's just as bad. You're failing too fast.
Yeah. I mean, there's one of the founders of Fuck Up Nights. I can't remember her name. I can't remember her name, but I just saw a TED Talk or something by her. And she said that she doesn't want people to fail more, because that's a stupid, I mean, that in business context, no, don't fail more. But I want people to fail better. Like, I want you to fail mindfully. Yes. So when you fail fast, you're not mindful, you're not learning from it. There's nothing to be gained by that, only loss. But if you can fail mindfully, then you can learn from it, and then hopefully that won't be a failure.
Yeah, I think so. Mindful failing. But what I'm really saying is persistence. And because you're not scared of failure, you say, oh, well, we tried this. We're trying to achieve this goal, this product, and this didn't work. Let's not scrap the product. Let's think about what went wrong. Let's fix it, and then let's experiment some more. That's what I'm arguing for, at least.
So I just want to add something to that. There's something really useful about having so if you look at processes within the innovation sort of sphere in organizations, where if you have a sort of an experimental mindset, then I mean, if you say we have these goals, we want to reach these results. Failure is much better if you fail early on in a project.
Yes.
Rather than late, because it's cheaper and it's easier and there's less prestige, etc., less invested in it. Why not fail boldly when it in the initial stages of these projects, and take great leaps and then fail horribly when it doesn't cost the organization their life.
Yeah. Okay,
but
that's good.
Yeah, so increase the failure rate early on in experimentation, which is, Silicon Valley does lead in that aspect. But I see it with organizations. I mean, I primarily work with European companies, and they invest all of their innovation sort of at the end. So they do a traditional sort of, what do we need? What does the market need? If it's new product development, they start early on deciding how the end result is, what it's supposed to be like, rather than experimenting early. They experiment late, and then failure hurts much more.
That totally makes sense. Well, I think we could talk about this for hours, and I'd actually like to. But so I think we've actually succeeded in talking about embracing failure. So well done us. But we failed to talk about the lesson. What are the principal causes of failure? And you must have seen that. Are there a handful of the things, the patterns that you see of that drive failure?
There's a quote by Leo Tolstoy, the Russian author, and he wrote in one of his novels, he wrote, "All happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in their own specific way, or their own special way."
Yeah.
And I was like, that's great, because that really applies to failure as well within innovation, because, most of the successful innovations, they're sort of, they're alike.
Right.
But if you look at the failed innovations, there are so many ways to fail. Like there's you can fail in ways you didn't even think was possible. And so my standard answer to that question is that that's what I think makes it so what makes failure so interesting is that there are sort of categories and sort of groupings of reasons of why innovations fail, but for the most part there isn't actually.
Really?
And I think that's fascinating. I wish I could say, yeah, here's the top 4 reasons, but
Yes.
I have some. I mean, one is hubris. If a company is too confident in their product or their technology, and just develop something that nobody needs or wants.
What's an example of that?
I mean, one example is Google Glass.
Yes.
I mean, what? What were you supposed to use that thing for? Actually, it was cool, but what's the function?
Yes.
0.
Yeah.
And it took them how many years to actually 2013? Yeah, 8 years.
Yeah.
To get it working. I mean, that was the first thing that came to my mind. But there's, I mean, and also when there's an overconfidence in amongst the leaders of the organization, and they don't listen to maybe the engineers or the salespeople or people on the factory floor. One would be Ford Edsel. It's a historical example. Ford's biggest failure, one of the biggest failures, it was a new car named after Ford's either son or grandson. I can't remember. Ford Edsel. In the 1950s, there was a lot of technological innovation, but primarily there was an innovation in the forms of, like, you could buy it in, I think it was 27 different varieties of cars for that Ford. And today we take it for granted, but then that was new and crazy. And Ford was so confident, they just bulldozed this thing through. They had their own entertainment show with Frank Sinatra. They were pushed. The Edsel was a guaranteed success, and they forced their dealers to buy huge amounts of Ford Edsel cars in advance. And they were like skeptical, like, this isn't quite right. But Ford was like overconfident. And sure enough, it failed, and it was one of the most embarrassing failures for the company. And that could have been possibly avoided had Ford listened to their dealers, listened to the customers.
But I think the fascinating thing about this subject is for every reason that you can come up with for failure, that can also be a reason for success.
I'm telling you, it's difficult.
Like, I was reading an interview with you that was published recently, which is very good, and they talked about what you described, the hubris of the leader. Basically, there's this maniacal following of the leader, but then you look at Apple, and they're run by a dictator in the old days, doing things in a very unorthodox way. The normal functionaries would not support it, but they did it because basically he did it. So on one hand, you have leaders who make bets, and sometimes they make good bets, and sometimes they make bad bets, and so that's
absolutely.
very
And for any example of failure. In this context, you can always twist it for the next iteration of that innovation, it was a huge success. Or products being launched too early, they were just ahead of their time, or too late. There's so many the variables. Like, if you would graph this out, the variables, there's so many sort of variables here that it's impossible to plot this.
Yeah, I would argue, here's my argument, timing is one of the biggest causes. You got the wrong timing is one of the biggest causes of failure, because
you can be too early, too late,
Yes, so the answer isn't be earlier, and the answer isn't being late. It's be smart about timing and really think about the risks you're taking, Because I don't. Did you see the documentary about General Magic? It's everyone's got time to watch documentaries.
Okay, I'm gonna watch it.
I think it's on Netflix. Super interesting. Basically,
what's it? General Magic.
General Magic, and the fact that they're not well known is amazing because they basically invented the smartphone. The problem is they did it 10 years before. It was a spin-off from it was the Newtons' alter ego, and there were basically two projects, one in Apple, which was the Newton, and one outside of Apple. And you look at this playbook, and it's actually you read the playbook that they wrote, and they describe the use cases and the user interfaces, and it's like, oh my God, that's what we're doing now. Only this was like 20 years ago. And the hardware just wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough, and many other things. They set expectations that were unrealistic with partners. So they had amazing partners, and then they all peeled off because the expectation. So I think you'll really enjoy it. But it kind of reminded me. I don't know if you've watched the Bill Gates TED Talk about viruses, and basically a few years ago, and he predicts everything that we're all going through at the moment. It was that same feeling. It's like, oh my God, deja vu. I want to talk a bit about the beacon ecosystem because that's kind of what we do. And I know you're not a Bluetooth beacon guy, but you deal with gadgets and that sort of thing. And, I think that the Bluetooth beacon ecosystem could be regarded as a failure because it had one of those things that you were talking about.
Why?
Well, I think the hype was massive. It was like, and people misunderstood the premise. So Apple came out with the iBeacon, and it was going to change the world. And every retailer said they were going to deploy iBeacons in all their stores. And they didn't realize this is actually a lot harder. And so, the challenges of scaling, Apple executed very well. They put beacons in all of their stores, and their expectations were very modest. They just wanted a welcome message.
That's not successful. Yeah.
For them, success was, we want a welcome message when you cross the threshold of the Apple store, rather than when you drive into the car park of a mall, and actually you probably aren't going to go into an Apple store at all. They had a geofence technology, and it just wasn't working, and so they developed the beacon. And lo and behold, they use it today. You run the Apple shopping app, and it welcomes you when you enter the store, and it switches into the other mode. But those of us were like, oh, anything Apple does is amazing. And so people were trying to do indoor location positioning down to a meter, and the technology just couldn't do it. It was so I think that was the expectation thing. But my argument is, actually, this has spun off a lot of companies have failed. So there's probably most of the startups that raised venture capital, tried something, failed. But what I've seen is they've pivoted, and they're actually doing things that are very successful as a result. So, there's companies like... there's a company called InMarket. They're based up in California. And, people looked at them as a beacon company. You could buy an InMarket beacon, but they're actually an analytics company. They've turned into an amazing analytics company. And I look at Williot as an example. So this kind of postage stamp size tags that basically a computer... So I don't think we would be doing what we're doing if it hadn't been for the beacon ecosystem, which, and who knows if we'll be successful. I think we will. We have amazing momentum. But so that's, my view on the ecosystem is... What you mentioned about,
the expectations, I think that we did sort of touch on that, but if you look at many of the stories of failure in the museum, something that could possibly predict failure is definitely when the expectations are far higher than anything you could achieve. And that, I think when I talked about hubris, that was one aspect of it, but just to promise, whether it's investors or customers or partners, something that you can't deliver pretty good recipe for failure. And it doesn't matter if you're a startup. If you can't deliver and you maybe get one shot or two, but you don't get three shots.
Right. And I think, I think that is a very fair assertion that you're making. But my counter argument is that failure that you identified is a necessary part of spinning up an ecosystem. Because unless you get 100 companies to try it, you won't figure out the 10 ideas that are good, and then the 3 companies in those 10 companies that will become the gorillas that will dominate. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
But nobody wants to be. I mean, evolution. The whole driver for life on Earth is mutations, and what is it like? 0.0001% actually survive.
Right.
Nobody wants to be those other 99%. So, I mean, I think the expectations for a new technology does have to be high. You got to get people excited about it, but there's also something about that sort of when it just gets saturated and people lose interest, like you see now with AI, blockchain. It's like, okay, all right, another person is going to talk about it. It's just boring because they overpromised.
Yes.
In one aspect, people like me who don't really understand it within the machine learning AI community, of course, they get it, but out to outsiders, they've way overpromised, and it's just like, okay, it's not. Yeah, that was another one of those hyped up technologies, which still has massive potential,
yes.
Obviously, but that's now, that segmentation is happening now that the hype is decreasing. So maybe it's a similar situation there with the beacon technology.
I think so, and I think we'll, fail fast. There's actually stuff. This story hasn't played out. I think there's other things. What Apple and Google are still doing with the technology is super interesting. But I think, creative destruction as part of capitalism, we celebrate it. And evolution is a reality that some people acknowledge and celebrate. But it's a recipe for success, not for happiness, right? If you're on the wrong side of creative destruction, it's miserable. It's horrible.
It's horrible.
So I want to we just got a couple of minutes left. I want to switch, and we've talked a bit about lessons that can be learned and how to deal with failure, and we've talked a bit about the Bluetooth beacon ecosystem and failure, and I have a rosy-eyed view of where this leads still. But I want to go back to your roots in play, and how did you get from writing a doctoral thesis on playing to where you are now? And just to make this a really big question, tell us kind of what your opinion is of play in the office in high-tech companies, because it's a bit of a bugbear for me. On one hand, I like Lego probably more than is healthy for the average adult. I have my tribute to the Italians here, the Leaning Power.
Sane adult, you mean? Okay, sorry.
But the thing that I hate is the tokenism, which I think you call it play washing.
Yeah.
So I've rambled a bit. What is play washing? Tell us about that.
Play washing is the same thing as greenwashing. It's when a company, and this is very frequently, you see this with startups, where they say, we're so fun, we drink beer on Fridays, and we have ping pong tables in the lunchroom, and we're so awesome. And then that's all just sort of an image that's not real. Look at our slide. We were inspired by Google's headquarters, so we have a slide, but now we use it to store bookkeeping.
Right.
So it's sort of like pretending to have this playful, genuinely playful work environment when it's not. I saw that it's still a trend. I mean, I still see examples of that, and it does the company a disservice, and it does play a disservice. I think what's so fascinating about play is that you can't force anybody to do it, you know? So as soon as, you know, your boss or somebody in authority says, now you have to play, and God damn it, you're going to like it too. Then all of a sudden it just magically destroys that sort of the magical sphere of play, because it has to be voluntary. And play that's forced is play opposed. Right. And you can see this in any kind of team building exercises or corporate, you know, choreographed play, where, you know, now we're going to do this and we're going to do it because it's fun, and we're going to do it and you're going to enjoy it. And then people, they react to it like, no, you can't force me. And you can't. So it has to be play has to be voluntary. It has to be self-motivated. And I would argue, and this is what gets me in trouble in organizations, is that play is not result-oriented. So, and this is something that a lot of creativity consultants and, you know, engagement at work consultants get sort of caught up in, is that you can do activities in a playful way, but as soon as you put a layer of sort of expectation of results or objectives, then play also kind of like, then it also kind of destroys the magic of it. And that's the connection to experimentation and exploration, because those organizational activities or behaviors, you have to temporarily suspend sort of organizational objectives to do that. And that requires, I mean, to be able to play and have a playful approach to your work doesn't mean, you know, screwing around, doing completely irrelevant things. Yes. But it means having an approach to work and to those tasks that you do it in a fun way, in an explorative, experimental way, where if you fail, it's still okay, it's acceptable. And it's impossible to force, you know, a person to play, and it's impossible, I would say, to take play and put it into an organizational context and try to, you know, restrain it with those regular corporate restrictions. Yes. And parameters. You have to let it be there, and you have to accept the fact that it doesn't work. It's not focused on the organizational sort of results or objectives. And that's what I think is the magic of it. And in that sort of that area, you're allowed to fail because you're not working directed, you know, perfectly, efficiently working towards that objective. You're taking a little pause here to you know, play with it.
Very good. Well, Dr. Samuel West of the Museum of Failure, I declare this interview a success. You joined up play with failure. We managed to make it work. The line's a little bit bad, but it's very cool to see you. I'm glad that you're safe and well, and thanks very much for joining us. You just have to think of what 3 songs you would take on a trip to Mars. 3. Yeah.
I would take. I'm obsessed with right now I'm obsessed with the Norwegian electronic band called Royksopp. They just make the most beautiful music. Royksopp, Roysopp. I think it means like magic mushroom or something. I'm not sure what it is.
Wow.
So
which if you had to, like, one song, can you name a song, or it doesn't?
It doesn't. I mean, one of them is called "What Else Is There?"
Okay, very good.
And another one is called "The Forsaken Cowboy." I think I might be mixing them together.
That's cool. So that's one. So you got your Norwegian. Yeah. Is it like heavy metal or?
No. It's like it's not dance electronica, but it's sort of it's electronic music. Okay.
Very cool.
I can't describe it.
That's all right. Well, we'll maybe hear a little bit if we can find it on Spotify, which I assume we can. So we'll hear a little bit.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'll send you the links. To
Fantastic.
some of my favorite ones.
So that's one. You got two left.
I also like. Okay, this is also the most beautiful song I've heard, and I can listen to it, as much as possible. Is Anne Brown. I think she's also Norwegian. I don't know why. I have no other connection to Norway there, but she sings a remake of "Hero" by, I think it's Beyonce or something, one of the big stars.
Okay.
She just does a remake of it, and it's just so beautiful. So you're like, can't believe it. And it's just her singing.
Yeah.
The third one, oh wow, the third one. Oh, I heard it. Okay, so David Lynch.
David Lynch, the film director?
Yeah. The director. Yeah. David Lynch has on Spotify, I think it's called, I'm not sure, but I think it's called B-Sides. And he does one song with Lykke Li, a Danish singer, pop star, whatever. And they do a collaboration it's called I'm Waiting Here. I think it's I'm Waiting Here. I'll send you that link as well. It's absolutely amazing. And it's David Lynch. You're like, he does music? Yeah, the guy's crazy, man. It's wonderful.
That's so impressive when you the Renaissance people are like Mark Moran, who I really enjoy his podcast. He's a great comic, but he also plays the guitar. He's pretty good. And so impressive.
Do you play instruments?
I've struggled with the guitar, so I'm actually not at home. I'm in my mother's house in California at the moment, and so she has a recorder. You can just about see behind me.
I see that,
but it's not mine. It's not mine. So no,
okay. All right.
Maybe if this thing carries on, then I'll have the time to do it. But at the moment, actually, things are super busy. It's like, where's this free time I'm supposed to be getting to?
I mean, I thought so too with the lockdown. It's been here in Spain. I'd say I've lost track of time. I think it's been 12 days already.
Yeah.
And now they just extended it by another 15 days. So. It's going to be a month total, and the first few days I was like, okay, this is kind of exotic, and it's kind of like, oh, this is novel.
Yeah.
But then it got old, and I was so unproductive, and I just surprised myself with my level of unproductivity.
Really? Yeah.
And then after the first 5 or 6 days, now I haven't been as productive and busy for a long time.
Yeah.
It's great.
Very good. Well, every cloud, as they say, has a silver lining.